to another episode of the Elevated Life podcast. I am one of your hosts. I'm Evette.
I'm Ashley.
And we are once again so excited that you have joined us. And we have another really fun, deep, topic. We could go really deep in this, Ashley.
Ooh,
Really deep. Yeah.
I'm
So,
telling you,
look, I'm going to be praying through this one. Okay.
stepping on some toes and
Right. We're
tooting
going
them
to pray
on.
through this one.
Yeah.
But our topic today is about breaking generational patterns. Breaking generational patterns. Some people might say generational curses. We're gonna go ahead and say patterns.
Change up the words.
Switch it up a little bit,
Mhm.
okay? But breaking those generational patterns. And so as we get started here today, there's so many ways we can take this topic. And we want to be mindful of time because we can get in this thing and be talking for a while. But we want to be mindful of time. So I think where we should start is what would you define or how would you define generational patterns? What comes to mind when you think about that?
Ooh, well, when I think of generational patterns, I think of behaviors, thoughts, ideas, concepts that you inherit, so to speak, without sometimes even knowing or even trying, without any effort. You pick up those, all those things I just mentioned that are passed down through your family, is one, concept. But then also, I think that on another side of generational patterns is looking at, I think, the era in which you grew up. So we all know, like, okay, yeah, when the 2000s music come on, we remember we was in
Hey,
college, we was, in our 20s, we was having a good time. That early
yeah,
2000s music, we love that. The 90s music, and a lot of R&B and things like that you can really resonate with. So I also think that it has time association with it as well, but depending on where you are in your life. It
yeah,
can mean different things. And just like we look at old school music, we call it old school, that was maybe made in like the 70s, 80s, 60s, sometimes even. But still, you can have some resonation with that because maybe you use that at home when you clean it up, or it was at the cookout, or, you can be what they call an old soul.
yeah.
So I think that there are several different ways to look at generational patterns, but I would say when I think of it, those are the areas that I immediately think of top of mind. What about you? What are your thoughts on generational patterns?
I'll be really honest with you. I always think of negative, like,
Mm.
I just remember growing up in church and hearing
Mm-hmm.
about like breaking those generational curses and
Yeah.
like but not really feeling very equipped on, first of all, not really truly understanding what that was, but then also not feeling very equipped on how to do that. And so when I think of generational patterns, I do have a tendency to think about it more negatively. But as I've grown, I do think there are some positive elements to generational patterns. And, some of it, as you said, have been passed down through generations, right? Their behaviors, thoughts, um, ways of doing things, how you manage relationships, could be how you manage finances, whatever those things are that could be kind of passed down in generations. But there are some really, and that can have a both negative and positive connotation to it. But there are some also very positive elements and more lighthearted things like what you just talked about.
Yeah.
So generationally, like first thing that comes to mind when you talk about music is my kids listening to this new age music, and I'm like, I'm sorry, but that song was sung by so and so. Like, I don't know what they done did with
Listen.
that. They sampling beats and stuff and throwing us off.
Exactly. You're like, okay. And then they get into saying some stuff that don't make sense. And you're like, well,
Right.
no, we're not doing that. So thanks.
Right. For like
Yes,
really
definitely.
like
Now,
vibing
some of
to.
it I can get with, but some of it is just completely left field. It's
Right.
just
Right.
really not happening.
Or like my kids vibing to Destiny's Child and considering that like old school music. Like, don't do me.
Yes.
Don't do me.
What? Oh my God. That I'm
Yes.
telling you, listen, the writing's on the wall, the best Destiny Child
Right.
album. Argue with somebody else because
Right.
the best album.
Right. Like,
But
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just made me think about a lot of different things though. Also, number one, definitely true about you can when you think about generational patterns, you can think about things that are negative because I am of the behavior pattern that if I see something generationally and I'm experiencing something, say with my parents or, in my family circle or something like that, that I don't necessarily like, I almost make it my business
Come
to
on.
make it different, and
Hmm.
design. So, like, I'm that type of learner, responder, behavior pattern, whatever you want to classify it as. But, some people can easily go into repetition and some people say, nope, I'm learning from that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I ain't
I
going.
saw you, exactly. I saw you fall in that pothole and I'm not going to walk that same
Yeah,
direction.
I'm
I'm going
good.
to go on the other street,
Yeah.
So and now it ain't perfect, this
Yeah.
formula of avoidance. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I try to do things differently if I don't,
Hmm.
necessarily
Hmm.
agree with what I see. Like, for example, now, this might be a southern thing. I'm just gonna see where we going with this. You got to turn the TV off and unplug the TV when it starts storming outside. You heard that one?
Because listen, there is some issues that can happen through that lightning striking
Yes,
and coming through that there TV. So
I'm
I
telling
have,
you.
right. So I have heard
Mm-hmm.
that, baby, we ain't unplugging no TVs.
I right, me neither. But I grew up doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Boy, and you had to sit there and be quiet.
don't talk.
The Lord's doing His work.
But there, you're so crazy.
That's what I'm saying.
No, no. I mean, there are some other things. Like one example I'll give you too, and I do think that this is a generational, like, um, I don't think it's just like a family generational pattern. I think it's a generational pattern. If you get if you're following, like mental health, therapy. There was a time, and even just going to the doctor, like,
Her last decade actual development. I mean, even though I went to school, my degrees are in counseling and that's kind of the path I started on. Even then, I
yeah,
still, when I started with that path, felt like I was like figuring it out, as
mm-hmm,
opposed to now, like, off the top of your head, you get a counseling degree. Number one, you can have your own business. That's the number one option that you can start with. You know what I'm saying? Back then, I didn't even
yes,
have the mindset to think about it in that you just trying to get a good job.
right,
you
right,
know, you just try to get a
yes,
good job.
yes. You trying to pay them
You know,
bills
exactly. And
and
now
not have to
I'm
go back home.
exactly now I'm trying to,
Mm-hmm.
tell my kids like if you don't ever have to start working for nobody, don't start.
Girl,
Start off and
yes,
understand what your talents are and offer them and get paid for it.
yes, and we gonna help you out because we're creating by the grace of God.
Amen.
We're utilizing the gifts that He's given us to make provision for our kids so that they don't have to start the same way that we started. And I don't think
Absolutely.
the thing with generational patterns, two things, and I want to get your thoughts on this. One is I don't think it's ever any intent to create bad generational patterns or things that are behaviors. I am certain that there are things that I'm doing today in my parenting, just in a lot of different ways that my kids are going to be like, I ain't doing that. Like,
Yeah.
I appreciate mama. She was doing the best she could, but I'm
Yeah.
not doing that. That ain't working for us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. I think you know, in my own personal journey, sorting out some things that I know generationally has just have come through my family. I had to come to this place where people were doing the best that they could do. And it
Yeah.
wasn't ever like necessarily in my situation ever came from a bad place. So that's one thing.
That's maturation though. And I
Yes.
remember the point to your, initial thoughts on this. I remember the point in my adulthood when I kind of
Hmm.
had that realization, like, a little bit after college, but still in my 20s, realizing like, because you often go back as a young adult to your parents and say, well, why this? Why that?
Right.
When you start to realize that choices were made for you and resulting that impacted you, uh,
Hmm.
and you wonder in comparison to your peers, how could this have been different? But you do have to give your parents the same credit
Yeah.
that, we hope that we get one day, that you're doing the absolute best that you can,
Yes.
with what you're given, with the knowledge that you have, with the resources that you have. And, I'm thankful, for the sacrifices that my family has made for me. And, the things that I have been taught, the things that I have learned. And, is, I would say, to your point, there are plenty of things that you could look back and say, well, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. But at the same time, there are things that are just deeply embedded in who you
Hmm.
are that you can't even help it. You
Yeah.
know, being a hard worker, being a person that
Hmm.
stays true to your word, being honest, having a high degree of integrity for all the things
Hmm.
that you do. Like, those are values
Of
that are taught to you.
yes, and
And
being
those are
resilient.
generational. Exactly. Those are things that are irreplaceable, that
Yes.
at no point should we ever lose.
I agree with you. Those generational those patterns that are values that really help to shape who you are, that you can look back on your family's history and legacy and say, these are things that have helped to sustain us. Like, I think about my grandmother, incredibly resilient, all the things that she's been through, really creating something out of nothing, quite honestly, at certain stages of her life, and never giving up, and making it to where she is now, where she ended up owning her home, which was like,
Amazing.
how did she, I mean, just hearing the stories of like, the kind of job she had, the amount of money she was being paid, and all the children that she's raising. She had 7 kids.
Wow.
And so like that, and just some of the things that she endured. And then I think about my mother and how resilient and strong she is and tenacious she is. And I get a lot, and then I am too. And it does, it's a little bit of little dash of crazy mixed in there. Like, you gotta be a little
Look,
crazy to have some
but
tenacity. Like,
keep it balanced. Okay, if you ain't got a
right,
little bit of that, you'll let folks treat you any kind of way.
right, right. And so listen, I thank God for that, because that has really been, and I've been able to show that to my kids. Like, my mom did not let us quit anything. You don't just quit. And it was bigger than sports or band or whatever the things we were involved in. It was her teaching us the value of staying at it, staying with it. And so I've taught those things. I'm teaching those things to my kids. The other thing I wanted to share and get your thoughts on, this is really interesting to me. When you approach breaking generational patterns, you're in territory that you've never been in before.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times there's no blueprint. So when you are saying this, hey, I understand this is what my family did because they had to, or what my parents did because this is what worked for them. But I'm trying to break this ceiling. I'm trying to get to this level, talking about the elevated life, right? Like, I'm trying to grow in this way, or I'm trying to go to this place. And I believe in my heart, and I know personally that a lot of those stages and levels of growth, my parents have been like, go get it, girl. absolutely like support, because you always want your kids to do better and be better than you, right? Or than what you had or what you had access to, and so forth. So what is that like? Broaching
And
generational,
you
breaking
struck a
generational,
chord
yeah.
with that really like got me like slightly emotional for a second,
Mm-hmm.
because knowing that space of doing something different than how you've seen it done is unknown territory.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely going in faith
Yes.
and relying and trusting on your gut feeling, your prayers, and how you're being led by God to really know, like, I'm not about to mess my life up
Right.
by doing this different. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
about to make a choice that's irreversible because I'm
Right.
doing this different and I'm not necessarily going on the path that, you know, those around me think I should be on or think I should do. So it definitely is scary. It's a faith walk. You have to trust yourself, trust God that all things are going to work out for your good. But it definitely is something that really grows you and
Mm-hmm.
really, I think at the same time also builds the confidence in who you are,
Mm-hmm.
because we are a part of our family. We are, a product of our environment. Everyone is. But at the end of the day, you do have components of you that are truly shaped by your experiences as an individual in your life.
Yeah.
So I think those moments when you break away from those generational patterns really create the core fundamental bricks and foundation of who you are to your core.
Yeah.
And, as you think about generational patterns and, of course, wanting to change them or wanting to keep them to the same, how important or, where do you think we've gotten to at this point where we value tradition? Where we
Mm.
value, I mean, and that can be in different aspects as society, as a part of your cultural group, as a part of your gender group, there's so many different, you know, aspects of life that have a culture and have tradition where, we talked about this in one of our previous episodes, knowing who you are in your relationship, say you're the cooker, the other person is not. Sometimes I have girlfriends where the husband is the chef and the wife is like, well, I'm doing all this other stuff. I'm glad you can cook, you know?
Yes.
So that I
Mm-hmm.
think is a beautiful example of changing generational patterns. And it's not from a place of, oh, I don't want to be like my mom was, or I don't want to be like my dad was, but more so
Good,
like, this
Ashley.
is how my family operates best.
That is
And I think
good.
it's important for us to remember and give space for ourselves
Mm-hmm.
to not be who our parents were, who our grandma was. It's important to bring them with you, the ancestors, everybody that came before us with you. But it's also important to remember that you got to function in your life. At the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, you in there raising your kids, you in there with your significant other, you the one showing up at your job, and you got to
Mm-hmm.
decide what you need to do so you can show up great.
Woo, that is tough. And I'll tell you, sometimes it can be a lonely place because
Oh,
you're stepping into
talk about
territory
it.
and places and spaces that no one else
Yeah.
in your
And they can't help
family,
you.
and they can't help you. And not only that, they don't understand sometimes. Like, one
Yeah.
of the things that we've set out to do is build a legacy for our family,
Amen.
and I'm not just talking about, um, recipes that we pass down, which are good. I'm not just talking about the character and values which we pass down, which are also very good. I'm talking about a legacy built on, um, starting something that our name is attached to, ultimately building wealth for our children and their children and their children.
It's in
A
the word.
legacy that,
Children's children.
right, that will live on beyond me and our kids, Martez and I and our kids. And so anyway, So and that's a tough one because legacy is like I don't want it to just sound materialistic, because it's not. But there are elements to financial security, wealth, and tying that to the future of our family that we want to explore, right? And that we're fighting for. So there,
Absolutely.
you're right. There are some traditions. There are also some things that I feel. Um, Again, because a lot of this was a new territory that I didn't have examples of. And so a lot of my understanding of, like we talked about before, marriage, being a wife, um, what a husband looks like. And I really feel confident that Martez has some of the same struggles. A lot of what we understood was things that we saw in the media, things that we were guessing on, and
Yeah.
at the time not really understanding what the word of God says about it. And so some of the social norms and traditions we bought into for ourselves because that was the only example that we had. You know what
Mm,
I mean? Like that
very
was the
good point.
only, yeah.
Very good point.
Girl, now we like there's two really strong principles. He's the leader of our home and we are partners in this at the same time,
Mhm.
and those two things can exist together. Don't let
Absolutely.
nobody tell you don't lie. The two can
Absolutely.
exist together. We are team Creighton, and he's the head coach and I'm the assistant coach, and we in this thing together, but we work together to build what works best for our family. And we
Absolutely.
had to figure that out.
Yes.
We had to figure it out. So
Absolutely. I mean, that's why that grace to figure that out and the space to figure that out is so
mhm.
important. And then in the figuring it out, not like, hurt each other,
Right. Girl.
or,
Yeah.
look into permanent alterations to the relationship. So it's important too to
Yeah.
really understand, like, yeah, we trying to do it like this. I think a lot of people run into that though. Think about the people that run into it like they trying to do it like they saw their parents do it. They trying to do it like they saw so and so do
The
it, and it
TV
ain't
show.
working. Right,
Do
it ain't working, and you ain't trying, like, try your way. Like just think about it. Like, if you were to do this different, what would you do?
Yeah.
And just try it and see if you can come to a better outcome.
The other
Mhm.
thing I think, though, you can even look at finances.
Mhm.
And I'm laughing because now this is where I'll get emotional because um, we have been on an incredible journey. Um,
Mhm.
we have been on an incredible journey financially since we became married. And I mean, we both made some really poor financial decisions really young, and we had to navigate our way out of that. And I will tell you, one of the natural inclinations that you have when you're trying to navigate something as sensitive as finances is to call and ask for help. And I came to this place, we both kind of did, where we're like, take what works for you and what doesn't, and keep in mind where you're trying to go. And so that is also a part of, like, when you think of traditions, there could be, or generational patterns, there could be things that you've seen financially in your family, or in your circle of family, whether it's biological or not, those people who have been part of your life, and they may not really know exactly how to help you navigate because they don't have all of the resources and tools and information available to them, right? They're trying to figure it
Yeah.
out themselves.
Absolutely.
So where do you want to lead the people today? Breaking generational patterns.
I would say the biggest thought for me around this would be definitely give yourself space to do it different.
Mhm.
Give yourself space to do it different. I definitely believe in honoring the tradition, and honoring things that are important and that are core values, but give yourself space to be you. Also, I would say that understand that it's all a journey. Like you are,
Yes.
even if you do it the same way that you've been taught, that don't mean you're gonna have the same outcome.
Right.
So it's all a journey, walking in the faith of trying to do the best you can with the resources that you have, even if you're making the unpopular choice or the unpopular decision. Believe in yourself and know that it all works out for your good. What
That's
would you
good.
say would be some of your key takeaways from this topic, or just like with your experience with generational patterns and keeping or abandoning them or charting your own path? What would you say are some of the key learnings that you've had?
I would say it requires reflection and awareness because, like you said, sometimes you don't even know that you've adopted a generational pattern that's good or bad.
Yeah,
And
that's a
so,
great
taking the
point.
time to
Awareness.
just kind of sit back and reflect, ask yourself some questions like, where did I learn this behavior from? Good and bad. Like, where is that from? And why do I or we, if it's something you've seen as a pattern within generations of your family or your circle, where does this come from? Um, the other thing I would say, I'm reminded of a conversation I was having with my older sister a few months back. And one of the things that we said, and I'm trying to remember exactly how we said it, but we essentially said, we're trying to not only break generational curses, but we're trying to build generational blessings.
Oh,
So what
generational
may
blessing.
yes, like what may have been a curse, we want to learn from and grow from and break that chain and build what God desires for the legacy of our family so that the blessings are what's passed down from generation to generation versus that curse. And so I
Absolutely.
think that's girl, that make me want
I'm telling you, improving the starting point.
to right. Yes. Yes.
Improving the starting point, like that's a major key
Right.
to really that trajectory changing
Changing.
is you know s- ooh,
Yes.
I mean, like, I like that's big, right? Like,
Yes.
yeah, like
Yes.
improving the starting point.
Yes. And we have the power to change that
Absolutely.
trajectory. And
Absolutely.
so glory be to God.
Yes.
This was a great conversation. The Elevated Life podcast. Anything else you want to wrap with, Ashley?
Yes. Follow, like, share, listen. Thank you for all your support, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.